The history of any country is always bound with unrevealed secrets, sacred places and riddles which scientists have been trying to solve for decades. Kazakhstan is an ancient land. Its history keeps a lot of glorious names, events and facts, some of which are still covered with myths and legends. The Time Puzzle crew tries to understand the intricacies of ancient and modern mysteries of history, traveling around the country and visiting its most amazing corners. In today's episode, ancient legends about the great warriors and military history of the nomads. Those people who defended their homeland, challenged a 1,000-year-old army, a wild animal or otherworldly forces were always honored. A lot of legends were told about them. Their history has long acquired the status of cultural heritage. The nomads also had heroes which can be called supermen. They learned military skill literally from the cradle. Their innovations in military matters went far beyond the Kazakh steppes and were taken up by other troops. Their knowledge and skills accumulated in the expanses of the steppe for a long time and eventually resulted in a special kind of warrior, Batyr. What Batyrs were like? One of the main requirements is that a Batyr should be generous. Ancient combat techniques that survived to our days. Turkic release seemed strange at first, but when I started to practice with Turks, it turned out to be very effective. Why did nomads love sabers? Here it is in my hands, a famous Kazakh saber. Unexpected facts from the history of Batyrs. Different people could become Batyrs, even the most desperate robbers. Watch all this right now. Heroes, great warriors, sons of the steppes. That's how people call them. Dozens of legends are told about them. People ascribe remarkable strength and super abilities to them. People name their children for them. My name is Andrei Slozhin, this is the Time Puzzle, and today we will learn about the life of the Batyrs. Legends and stories about Kazakh Batyrs were passed as a rule by word of mouth. The Kazakhs did not record their exploits, combat techniques, military equipment and the structure of the army. At least now, modern historians and researchers have found very few textual descriptions of the Kazakh warrior, Batyr. All the information about them is collected from sources that were made by other sedentary peoples confronted with nomads. However, according to historians, these descriptions are not complete. Therefore, the search for genuine information about the life of the Batyrs is not an easy task. The author of the book The Age of the Last Batyrs, the historian Radik Temirgaliev, knows a lot about this. And the sources themselves are completely different. There are Eastern sources including Chinese, Arabian and Persian. Also Western sources, Russian sources, Kazakh sources themselves. Very large material is contained in Kazakh folklore. One of these legends tells of a strong and courageous Batyr named Jibek Batyr. He saved Abilai Khan from the Jungar captivity. According to the story, Jibek first brought out the Khan and then again returned to the very epicenter of the battle and struck down many enemies. Jibek remained alive and in peacetime continued to live the usual life of a nomad. People said that he was guarded by 2 wolves. This story was told by his uncle when he saw how Jibek slept in the steppe, and his rest was guarded by 2 blue-gray wolves. In addition to folklore, the artifacts that survive to our days also help to recreate the picture of the past, the way of life and tactics of combat, as well as the peaceful life of the Batyrs. Thus, historian and ethnographer Gulmira Bilalova believes that the Saka period could be considered the starting point in the history of the birth of the military state among the nomads.
Первые батыры — это со времен древних скифов.
The first Batars were from the time of the ancient Scythians, Saks and ancient Turks. The combat tactics probably didn't change. Moreover, it was improved by the heirs of these traditions of ancient Saks, ancient Turkic people. According to historians, the Saka tribes switched from a settled way of life to nomadic or semi-nomadic in the 7th to 1st centuries BC. Some researchers believe that the main cause of such changes was the climate change in that period. Droughts, scarcity of water and food resources caused many tribes to change their habitual way of life.
Практически вся жизнь на казахских землях была связана.
Practically all the lifetime on the Kazakh lands was connected with the fact that we had to defend the territory, the land from other peoples who wanted to capture our rich pastures and meadow areas, rich in grass, rich in rivers and cities. Thus, the Sakas began developing military skills. It was necessary to defend the fertile territory from the attacks of other tribes. In such confrontations between the nations for the lands, peculiar kinds of troops began to form. They had different tactics and modernized weapons that were originally invented for hunting. One of the most bloody battles of the Sakas was the battle with the Persians. According to legends, Yatagin Batir was a strong and clever warrior. But the trouble was the Persians led by his ruler Cyrus. The advisors of Yatagin said the Batir should gather more warriors because the Persians were formidable opponents. But Batir refused. He took only the best and advanced soldiers to meet the enemy. The legend does not say how many warriors there were and how many days the small Yatagin's detachment fought with the Persian army. This story only tells about the strength and dedication of each fighter. Although Yatagin could not stop the enemy invasion, nevertheless, he killed many invaders. Curiously, some researchers and historians draw a parallel between the legend of Yatagin and the famous story of King Leonid and his 300 Spartans. It is for sure not known whether such parallels exist with reality. The legend of Yatagin Batir clearly describes how the military art of the Sakas developed. Of course, this process took more than 100 years. So, over time, stirrups were invented, vehicles that helped transport more objects appeared, bows and swords were modernized. Now the weapon was not only for protection, but for attack. Consequently, the nomads began to master it more skillfully. Jibek Kunguzhinov, the head of the stunt group and stunt director in many Hollywood and Kazakhstan films, told us about the origin of the Kazakh martial art. For Jibek, knowing for sure the history of the nomads is necessary in order to avoid inaccuracies on the set. We are constantly studying this, because in many historical movies, this should be as realistic as possible. Batirs were considered to be natives of the people. They were people who are strong physically and strong in spirit, which means they were those people who could unite people around themselves, who could become a role model, inspire young people and soldiers. The word Batir comes from the Turkic Mongolian Bakadur. Warriors who were distinguished in the battle were called so. Later professional military men were called Bakadurs. This should be an extraordinary man. And the bravery only wasn't enough. Now simply brave person or just a strong athlete can be called a Batir. In fact, it was such a special, completely special character constitution. They can probably be compared with the berserks of the Vikings. Many researchers compare Kazakh warriors and Batirs not only with Vikings but also with Japanese samurais. However, it must be said that the title of a samurai, unlike the title of Batir, was inherited. Samurais were higher by status than ordinary people. Batirs were men of the people. It was not easy to become a bater. It was not just a title. It had to be earned by all his life. Famous baters, they went out to fight. Jibek in Kazakh, one-on-one. And by the number of defeated opponents, bater remained in the centuries, in the memory of the people. The baters had an unspoken code. Unfortunately, there's no written copy of it, but thanks to the study of various legends and stories, we can learn some rules of life of baters. One of the main requirements is that a bater should be generous. That is, he had to give the hunting prey away. The military trophies that he received were to be given away. For example, the same Abylai Khan, according to the Russian sources, one of the reasons for his rise was the fact that he distributed all the spoils to his people, thereby gaining authority. That was important. Studying the legends and folk epic as well as the small descriptions of the contemporaries of the baters, the historians made conclusions about the arming of such soldiers and their tactics of combat. Of course, the most common combat technique was the so-called round dance. The riders were galloping circle-wise in the center of the field, and they were shooting arrows one by one, like a machine gun. And while some of them were shooting, others were refilling quivers, preparing arrows, and it was a massive shooting with arrows. They were all-rounders, because archery was the basis, especially on horses. Saber battles are the same, because they often had to start at a long distance. I know that they were moving circle-wise and it worked like a machine gun. While one was shooting, the other was preparing their bows over and over again. Archery itself was also unusual. The enemy did not understand why the Kazakhs can recharge the bows so quickly. How do they shoot from those positions, from which it seemed impossible to shoot an arrow? The Arab historian Al-Jakirs wrote in the 11th century, "A Turkoman shoots at wild animals, birds, targets and people. He shoots letting the horse back and forth to the right and left, up and down. He releases 10 arrows before Harijit puts an arrow in the bowstring." I worked in many countries and actually saw the release. Shooting from the bow holding the bowstring, it is called the Turkic release. I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that it seems to be mostly we shoot in European way, when we put 3 fingers on the string and pull it. And it turned out that the Turkic release is more effective by a horse rider. In other words, firstly, if an European release you pull by fingers and elbows to a greater extent, the shoulders work little. Turkic release seemed strange at first, but when I started to practice with Turks, it turned out to be very effective. For a long time, the nomads were keeping it secret. According to some researchers, disclosing this secret to an alien was punishable by death. It was passed from warrior to warrior, from father to son. When being captured, the nomad should not, under any circumstances, disclose this secret. There is a legend about the bater named Yelenke. Fighting with the Kalmyks, he was captured. His body was cut, but the Kalmyk commander ordered to cure the bater and keep him as the best guest. When Yelenke recovered, the Kalmyk Khan suggested him to marry his daughter. He promised to Yelenke peace and wealth, said that from now on he will not fight against the Kazakhs. In return, Yelenke only needs to tell the secrets of his martial art and teach the Kalmyk warriors. Yelenke replied that it was better to die an honest death than a vile life. Bater was beheaded. He did not disclose the secret of military art. Thanks to painstaking work in the archives of China, Mongolia, as well as Asian countries, a modern historian managed to find a description of one of the secrets of Kazakh soldiers, a unique method of archery. You put a thumb on the string, you put your index finger on it, and due to this you squeeze the arrow, and the arrow lies exactly on the right side. and when you shoot in any direction, the arrow does not fall. And it goes, firstly, the stopping power is very powerful, and plus you recharge it very quickly, and the arrow does not fall out. According to historians, Kazakh bows were compound, the handle and two elastic parts, which were fastened with leather straps and bone pads. Their length ranged from 70 to 120 centimeters. The bowstring was made from horsehair or guts. The length of the arrows reached 70 centimeters. By the way, such arrows are kept in the Museum of St. Petersburg. But the real warrior, in addition to the bow, must skillfully master all types of weapons. I investigated this situation. The warrior was supposed to be versatile. He was also prepared to be an archer. In other words, there was no such thing as in the European armies, for example, the same Napoleon, and before him and after him. The Kazakh army was divided by quantitative structures. On deck, or 10 soldiers' detachments were formed, and the 10's manager directed them. 10s were united in the 100, Jibek, which was headed by Juzbasi. 10 hundreds formed the 1000, or Mindik, which was headed by Minbasti. And then there was a 10,000 army, 2 men. They were special horse soldiers.
Тяжелая кавалерия, это была такие сильные, закованные в броню.
Heavy cavalry. There were such strong armored soldiers who attacked at the right moment. And the basis of the military, of course, was a light cavalry, which at first shoot the arrows to the enemy and then supported this decisive attack. Of course, there were the cooks in the nomadic army which provided fresh and hot food, but warriors never ate a big meal before decisive battles. This was done for 2 reasons. The first, a well-fed batir was sluggish in the saddle. The second, getting injured having a full stomach is a 100% guarantee of a long and painful death. Let's not forget about the standard bearers. They were warriors who were highly respected, most often famous batirs. Very few people know, but the Kazakhs had a special ritual when a warrior carrying a combat banner died. Standard bearers were also proven people, time-tested, battle-tested, really brave warriors, as the fall or loss of the battle banner meant defeat in the battle. Therefore, naturally, as according to traditions of other nations and other cultures, it had to be the bravest warrior who had to protect a military banner in a battle. For example, under the rule of Abylai Khan, the standard bearer was the famous Batir Oljabai, and he needed not only courage, but also the ability to fight both in the near and in the distant battle, protecting that shrine. And when the Batir died, the battle banner was broken. Its flagpole was broken, which meant that one more Batir had left this life. There is a legend about the famous standard bearer who later became commander of Abylai Khan. His name was Naurizbai Batir. According to the legends, Naurizbai Batir was like a camel in height. During the Anrakai battle, the Kazakhs had no one to put it in a duel with the Jungar Khan Shamal. Naurizbai came out. The battle was short. He killed Shamal at the first stroke. After this battle, Abylai Khan made him a commander of 10,000 troops. The legend says that Naurizbai was in command until he turned 70. If a small detachment was sent to the campaign in order to go unnoticed into the rear of the enemy, the Kazakhs formed mobile groups from the most experienced and strong soldiers. They could withstand marches for tens or even hundreds of kilometers at a time. There was no time for halting, but people needed to eat something, and according to the researchers, it was then that the first analog of the modern travel ration appeared. We all like air-dried meat. It does not matter it is horse meat or beef. Now it is considered dainty, both in our country or in Europe. It costs much. What did the cavalry of Genghis Khan do? They immediately used their fallen horses as food. They cut the meat of the fallen horse into small plates right in the middle of steppe. Then all this meat was laid under the saddle cloth. The saddle cloth is a large piece of leather that was laid on the horse back under the saddle, so that the saddle did not press on the horse. And the most incredible, during the high jumps or during the big transitions, a horse sweats and allocates salt. And the rider received magnificent, luxurious, tasty meat, salted, jerky meat. It was enough to drink a couple of sips of a Mongolian drink or Kazakh kumis and eat 2 to 3 pieces of meat, and the warrior became strong again, because it is a very powerful protein food. They washed the meat down with mare's milk, kumis. It was kept in a leather bag. Thanks to constant shaking and leather shell, the milk went sour and acquired toning properties. In addition, kumis was useful for digestion. They dried meat on the smoke. They stuffed the same curd into the bags, which is the dried milk itself. It did not spoil. That's why they took it with them. Such food was also convenient during ambushes. The soldiers did not have to cook their own food at the stake, which smoke could draw the enemy's attention. In general, the fighting tactics of the Kazakhs frightened and amazed the enemies. If we are talking about the steppe, it is mostly long-range attacks in the beginning. They were shooting all the time, spinning, advancing, retreating, and this slightly ruined the enemy's formation. After that, they often attacked their enemies from the rear. That is why I said about the long marches, and they often changed horses. The nomads always had 2 to 3 spare horses, because they needed to go around from behind during this fight. And in order to gain speed, so that the horse do not get tired, they jumped to another horse. Also, nomads used a psychological way to intimidate an opponent. Chroniclers of that time always mentioned the huge number of troops. To make such impression, nomads often used cunning. They could put dummy on a horse, or a woman, or a child, in order to create such psychological pressure on the opponent. In fact, nomads always were numerically insignificant. A great interest is caused by the weapons used by Kazakh Batirs. Historians who study the way of life and customs of the people of Asia tend to believe that Kazakhs could forge weapons themselves and buy them in the largest arms market of that time. When they say Damask steel, it is not because it was forged in the city of Damascus. It just was the center of gunsmiths. Damascus was a major arms market, where weapons from all over the East, from around the world, were sold. Generally, it was blades. The Germans invented these patented blades too. And now when they say Damascus steel, this is complete nonsense. Damascus is the distribution center for weapons, hence the glory of Damascus. All kinds of ambassadors presented weapons to the nomads. This is indicated by findings from excavations. In the burials of the Batirs, European swords, axes, and even rifles were found. Most people tend to believe that before the 18th century, the Kazakhs had no idea about firearms. Indeed, if compared with the agricultural states, especially with Russia, of course there were no much firearms. But if we compare the Kazakhs with other nomadic peoples, it is known that the Kazakhs were first, who mastered it before other nomadic peoples. Secondly, it was more common for them. It was noted in comparison with the Bashkirs, in comparison with the Kalmyks, even in comparison with the Jungars at the first stage. Then the Jungars caught up with this lag and even outstripped the Kazakhs. But at the initial stage, the Kazakhs were ahead of all. They had mastered firearms, and there even were such separate units or detachments that were armed with firearms. The Kazakh guns were of two kinds, with long and short trunks. They were bought both from the Jungas and the Chinese. And in the Russian Empire, people mainly bought them for gold and silver. No matter how paradoxical it may sound, but during military operations, commodity circulation between peoples and countries did not cease. Merchants were out of politics. Basically, of course, the Kazakhs had more Junga guns. Here it is quite simple. The wooden stock is one piece. Here. The trunk is forged. It is faceted here. Powder was put in here. Very dense trunk to keep it safe during the shooting. Powder was put inside, then lead bullets of any shape, not necessarily round. They were even chopped bullets. A wad or a piece of rag. And here on this stock, by the way, here it's missing. Fine-grained powder was put inside, and coarse-grained powder was put into the trunk. And here is the wick that was in this tube, an oiled wick. It was inserted, the end of the wick was inserted into this hook, the wick was set on fire, then I press this hook, the wick descends to the box, sets fire to the fine powder. And here the hole. The fire kindles the gunpowder inside. The shot is fired. In general, historians noticed one characteristic feature in the equipment of a Kazakh soldier. He was supposed to have 5 main types of weapons. Bes karu. It is small arms, slashing, piercing and crush weapons. Small arms, bow and arrows. Slashing, fighting axes or pole axes. Piercing is a spear or naiza. Crush weapons were club, mace or axe. Bos moyin is a formidable weapon. In translation, bos means free, moyin is the neck. It is also known as the battle flail. The shape of the knob could be different, as well as the material it was made of. It could be bronze, iron, or as in this case, wood covered with leather. There is another interesting formidable throwing and piercing weapon. It is a spear. Pay attention, it is sheathed with horsehair. This is done to ensure that the blood flows down the horsehair, not the shaft, and the bater's hand does not slip at the next blow. To the enemy. Of course, the fifth item in the weaponry of the nomad was a sword or a saber. They were especially revered among the fighters. It is not for nothing that a lot of saying appeared among the people were saying about a sword. For example, the stronghold for a sword is scabbards. The stronghold for scabbards is a bater. Here it is in my hands, a famous Kazakh saber, Kaike Klish. Here is a magnificent sheath. Here, the wood itself, see? First comes wood, 2 plates. It is well processed. Here is the calf skin. It is covered with calf skin, a tip made of good steel. By the way, there is an inlay. Here it is gold, you see, which means that this saber could belong to a very distinguished and rich warrior. As a rule, to a ruler or a famous bater. But before becoming strong and respected people, the baters survived a harsh school of life. Almost always, baters had a really difficult childhood. It often happens that a person who remains an orphan is often somewhere in the service. It is such general subjects for the biography of the baters. For example, the same Ablai Khan grazed camels when he was a teenager. But later, he had an opportunity to show his daring, to show his courage. Often boys who from early childhood were distinguished by their disobedient temper and firm character later became courageous warriors. Becoming teenagers, they, like modern youth, often brought a lot of trouble to fellow villagers. If we look to Kazakh epic, we can see that they have been very unsociable since childhood. They offended and bullied their peers. They could even spoil their aul's quiet life, and this is also reflected in some sources. But when the enemy appeared, when there was a danger to society, namely such people, they took on the role of defenders. Thanks to the heroic epics, we might think that all the Batirs were ideal representatives of the society. This is not entirely true. Let's remember that a Batir is, above all, a special person with a certain charisma, great inner strength and desperate bravery. Surprisingly, but according to the historian Radik Temirgaliev, the people called such people Batirs. Even the most desperate. Robbers who robbed simply everyone and spared no one could be considered Batirs. By the way, the Cossack atamans were called Batirs. Yermak was called a Batir, although it would seem strange because he was like an opponent, but they recognized his military valor and recognized him as the Batir. Now it becomes clear that there was a lot more Batirs in the Kazakh steppes than the history told us. Many of them died in battles and fights, being completely young, without living descendants and loud legends. But modern Kazakh people remember the names of the most famous Kazakh warriors, as well as their traditions. Let's remember national games. Now this is just a way to pay tribute to history. And centuries ago, Batirs acquired various skills and dexterity by playing those games. Later, such skills were very useful and saved Batirs in battles. Moreover, not so long ago, it became known that the Batirs held competitions which were like night tournaments. Many national types of games, for example the same kokpa, which is very hard, but this is one of the training, as well as the picking up a shawl. In theory, this is like the picking up of a fallen weapons, which is also training. Shooting from the bow, throwing a dart, jek with spears. They had it all. As far as I know, even the spears were used. They took it from the other side. On the one side there was a tip, they turned the spear over the other side, wrapped it with the skin and beat each other. They had such competitions.
Среди батыров не было женщин. Это звание было прерогативой мужчин.
There were no women among the Batirs. This title was the prerogative of men. But few people know Kazakh women cleverly owned weapons and even took part in battles, skillfully handling bows and swords. Women were trained almost on a par. This is noted again from the ancient Turkic times and in the days of Genghis Khan. Well, if there is an enemy, there are simply no other means, and everyone who can carry weapons should have fought together. Therefore, as it is noted in the sources, there was some kind of freedom for women in the Kazakh society, because a person who wears weapons, who can use weapons,
he can protect himself. You cannot oppress a person who owns a weapon and knows how to use it.
It turns out that despite the widespread opinion, beauties of the Kazakh steppes were not only guardians of the hearth, but also real war friends for their jigids. The worthiest girls were taken by the Batirs as wives. In peacetime they lived a nomadic life, like their fellow tribesmen. Batir was not an ascetic and he did not take the oath of celibacy, as did the same Viking berserk. Nomads always respected families with many children. If Batir lived long enough and managed not to perish on the battlefield, which was not possible for everyone, let's say for a minimal amount. But if he still lived to a very old age, then naturally he became a bey. He became the ruler, the judge. In the history of Kazakhstan, there are a lot of Batirs which are revered by people till now. Rainbek, Koblandi, Bogenbai, Kabanbai, Bukenbai, and hundreds of other glorious sons of the Kazakh people who remained in history. These simple people glorified their glorious deeds and strength, and their comrades in arms and brothers in arms turned their names into battle cry. Uran! Most of Uran's battle cries that exist among the Kazakhs are just the names of formerly living Baters. The warriors believed that the spirit of this Bater would help them in the battle when they shouted his name going on the attack.
Бесспорно,
Undoubtedly, routine, military tactics and life of the Baters played one of the key roles in the formation of Kazakhstan as a state. People still come to their graves to pay tribute. Baters are a sacred history of our country. My name is Andrei Slozhin. It was the Time Puzzle. See you.